Today, we're going to talk about scheduling audits. I don't mean a single audit, but scheduling your entire schedule for the year for internal audits and supplier audits. A lot of people are just like, well, we're going to have one at this time for an internal audit, and we're going to try to avoid doing any supplier audits at all. The supplier audits are supposed to make sure that your suppliers are doing what they say they're doing and try to make sure that they're compliant with FDA regulations, ISO 1345. And it's a great time to see if you can resolve any of those quality problems you're having instead of just keep on saying, well, we'll wait until they make that mistake 3 times in a row. So first things that you need to think about, how many audits are you going to do? Some of that's resources. If you don't have the resources, don't put it in the schedule. You can always add more audits, but it's kind of hard once you put it in a schedule. I'm going to do this many audits to say, well, we ran out of money, so we're not going to do those extra audits. So only put in there what you have the resources to do. The simplest is to do one big audit for your internal audit, and then the most critical suppliers. Anybody that is a contract manufacturer that's making your finished device, anybody that's a contract sterilizer, those would be your most important suppliers. If somebody's doing contract packaging for a sterile product, that would also be in that category. But if you don't have any of those 3, maybe you don't have a supplier that's absolutely critical to audit. So maybe you don't need to go do those supplier audits. Don't do supplier audits? Yeah, there's no place in the standard where it says you shall audit the suppliers. It says you have to evaluate the suppliers. So if the supplier is a physical device manufacturer, they're a contract manufacturer, and they're making mistakes, you have a reason to go visit them. If they're doing everything perfectly and they're ISO certified and registered with the FDA, why are you auditing them? Only because somebody told you you had to. So if you don't have the resources and they're doing a great job, don't put it on the schedule. If they're not doing a great job and you have the resources, go audit those suppliers. And what are the expectations? Most of the notified bodies in the FDA are going to expect you to do supplier audits for the most critical suppliers. If you are a software company, say, well, we don't have contract manufacturing. We have software as a medical device. We don't have sterile products. We don't have packaging and products. But if you're outsourcing the development of software, maybe you should be doing a remote audit of that developer, looking at their processes, looking at their training records, looking at how they manage their development process. So just because you're making software doesn't mean there isn't a need for doing an audit. You still need to think about what kind of audit. Is it a remote audit or is it on-site? If the developer isn't there and they're working from home, why are you doing an on-site audit? Do a remote audit. So that's the first part, deciding how many audits you're going to do and what type of audits they are going to be. Once you've decided that, now where do we put that on our calendar? So when you're thinking calendar, don't think 1 year. Think longer, because you might have a management review, let's say once a year in October, and you might have something change in your schedule and things get delayed. And now a notified body or a certification body comes in and they do an audit and they're like, you don't have an audit schedule that's complete because you were planning on doing that review and approval of your audit schedule during your management review, but things got delayed. So think a little bit longer, think 18 months. That way you always have that 6-month buffer on the back end, just in case something happens. And things don't happen when they're supposed to. If you have an 18-month schedule, you're always got 6 months more than you need. The next thing I look at is, how am I going to review and approve this calendar schedule? The best place to do it is in your management reviews. You have to discuss audits anyway in your management reviews. Discuss whether you're conducting them on schedule, discuss whether you need to do more audits, fewer audits. If there are certain processes you want to focus on based on the results that you've seen of analysis of all the data from your different processes and product. Maybe you say, we want to audit this area in particular because we're having problems there. Or This is a new division. Let's spend more time auditing that this year. So if you have an area of importance, spend a little bit of time in your manager reviews, say, spend more time auditing this year. Now that you've decided, okay, this is when we're going to approve it. We're going to approve it at our manager reviews, and we're going to plan it for 18 months. And we've decided how many we're going to do and what the types of audits are going to be. Now it's where on the calendar are we going to put them? Now, if you've decided I'm only going to do the simple approach, I'm just going to do one big internal audit, you've got a single block of a few days that you're going to put somewhere on your calendar. Probably you want to pick a time of year that's not terribly busy, when not everybody's on vacation. So probably between now and Christmas is the last possible time you want to be scheduling something. Everybody's like, oh, I got to finish it by the end of the year. Well, that's great, but there's nothing in the ISO standard that says you have to finish it by December 31st. It says you have to schedule it and conduct it as scheduled. So why can't you do it in January? It's only a month later. January might be a slow month. It might be an ideal time. Everybody was just on vacation. They're back to work. Now's a great time in January to do that audit. Maybe in August when everybody's on vacation and holiday down by the beach, probably not the best time to do your audit either. Maybe at the busiest time of the year, at the end of let's say you have a fiscal year that ends July 1st or June 30th, and you're trying to ship as much of a product as you possibly can to try to make those numbers look good financially. Maybe the end of June is not the best time to do that audit either. So pick the part of the year that is best. Now, if you have this genius idea of maybe we don't want to do the whole entire audit all in one block. We don't want to do a 3-day straight audit where all our resources are focused on that audit for 3 days. Maybe what you want to do is split it up into processes. We call these process audits. Instead of doing the process approach to the whole quality system, use the process approach to individual processes. Now you can optimize the timing of that for each department or each process. So the manufacturing process, you want them to be active when you do that audit, but maybe you don't want to do it when they're busiest. But that might not be the time that the shipping department is least busy. And it might not be the time that the design team is least busy. It might not be the time that the quality department is least busy. So think about when it would be best for each process and optimize the scheduling that for that process. And shorter audits are so much easier to schedule. If I need to schedule a 2-hour or a 3-hour block on my calendar, I know I can do that. At the worst, I have to move a meeting. But if I'm trying to schedule a 3-day, I have to cancel things. So think about process audits in very small context. Here's another thing that you want to keep in mind. We talked about remote audits. You have on-site audits and remote audits. If all the activities that you're auditing are done in a conference room or at somebody's desk, there's no advantage of doing an on-site audit versus a remote audit. But here's the advantage of doing a remote audit. One little tiny advantage, you can record. Now I have a recording of the audit I did. If I have a new auditor doing that, I can give that recording, that MP4 file, to an experienced auditor and get feedback on it. Now I can use that to say, well, this auditor, they've only done a few audits. They're new to auditing. This is what you need to improve so they can so they can see what they're doing. So you might specifically assign auditors that are new to different processes to see how they audit that area. And when you're doing it as an internal audit, there's very little risk. You can go back and do extra work to supplement what they did if they didn't do a thorough job. But when you're doing a supplier audit, you have to get permission to do the audit. You need to schedule it with their convenience. So you probably want to make sure that everybody that's doing the supplier audits, they have their A game and you have your best people doing that. But if you're doing an internal audit, you can use that a little bit more as a training opportunity, record the audits, and have an expert look at that and give them advice on what they need to improve and how they might have changed their approach to auditing, where they might have missed some opportunities for sampling records or following an audit trail. So think about doing remote audits, even when it's an internal audit. And that's not really a remote audit, it's a virtual audit. It's an audit we're doing all on camera and we're recording it. So that way, maybe you're in this conference room or I'm in this conference room, or maybe we're both in the same conference room, but we want to record what was done so we can share that with an expert and get some feedback on it. So those are some of the things to think about strategically to get additional value out of your audit. Then are we compliant and are we meeting the requirement to do internal audits? I talked about the rolling schedule. Think about with supplier audits, think about trying to group suppliers that are in the same vicinity together. So if you're going to send somebody out to the West Coast and you're on the East Coast, have any other suppliers that are on the West Coast audited at the same time. If they're in the same city or within a local drive, that's even better. But don't have people jet setting across the country or going out of the country only to come back there again in 6 months later. So try to group those audits together geographically. That will help you. Also think about qualifications. Oftentimes we have an auditor matrix that talks about this auditor cannot audit this area because there's a conflict of interest, or this auditor can do an ISO 1345 audit, but they're not qualified to look at software because they don't have that software experience. So we're not going to have them audit the software processes or the software vendors. We're only going to have them audit sterilization, packaging, hardware, things that they understand well. And then we'll have a different person that understands software to go audit the software vendors. So think about conflicts of interest in qualifications in experience when you're thinking about who you're going to assign. It might really help to come up with a matrix that says, here are the different processes and here are the different auditors. And then X out the ones where you can't do this audit because this auditor doesn't have that experience. So that's a great way. Some people will block off that. Sometimes people will gray out the box, but it tells you which auditors you can use in the matrix for which processes. And that really helps. And some people even make that part of their auditing procedure or make it as an appendix to their auditing procedure. So those are some things to think about. Things that you might also think about, a lot of times we're thinking about just the minimum requirements. So we need to do a full quality system audit. But things that you might want to spend more time on, one process, we're going to spend an hour on that, we're done. Maybe document control, record control. Those aren't really process audits. Let's say maybe it's shipping. So the shipping process, we're going to spend an hour on that. But if last year you had nonconformities in that area, you might have a CAPA that needs effectiveness check. Maybe you should be spending more time on that area. So look at your importance of areas and look at the nonconformities or results from previous audits and schedule more time for those areas that are high importance and had previous results that were negative. Gives you more time there and less time on the areas where everything was running smoothly and it's not a critical area. If you have a CAPA effectiveness check, devote more time to that to make sure it's thorough. And then anytime you have any kind of findings by an auditor or a new process, devote more time to those. Maybe you have new employees in the department. Maybe you have a new manager in the department. Maybe you just revised the procedure. All those would be opportunities for a little bit more time to be spent on those areas. Trying to think of anything else here. Oh, another term for that, those process audits would be partial audits. Not a full quality system audit, but a partial audit. So I've given you a lot of different strategies and techniques. How do you make sure you covered all the clauses? The trick there is to use a matrix. And we actually have a clause traceability matrix that we make available. So if you look at in our auditor tools on our website, we actually have that, and it's also part of our auditing procedure. So if you go to medicaldeviceacademy.com, look at our turnkey quality system procedure, I believe 21 is our internal auditing procedure, And that's where you can find that matrix for all the clauses. And you just go down the checklist and list which audits that clause was covered. And that way you can identify the gaps, and that'll help you. Oh, we need to spend more time on this area. We haven't sampled that process enough or that clause enough. And that can make sure that you're extremely thorough. And the goal here, remember, is not just to do the absolute minimum. We want to do more than the notified bodies, more than the certification bodies, more than the FTA. So we find problems in the internal audits and supplier audits before the outside or third-party auditors find them. So we're supposed to be the front line of defense, catching it first. So that's the purpose. You want to spend more time, not less. Okay, I hope that helps you. If you have any other questions, please let me know. Excuse me. You can put comments below in whatever platform or channel you're watching this live. Just put comments below. And we also have, I'm going to try to put it up on the screen here. We also have a blog that's going to be next Tuesday. So subscribe to our blog feed. We're going to be putting up more buttons for you to more easily subscribe to our blog. We should have that up there by next week. But take a look at our blog. Usually every Tuesday we release that. And the one on Tuesday is going to be specifically more information about scheduling your audits. So we have a blog about that, but we're going to improve that and expand it, and we're going to repost it on Tuesday, and you'll be able to subscribe to our blog feed and get any new blogs, because for the next couple of months here, we're going to be doing a lot of stuff that's related to audit. I hope that helps, and I hope you have a great weekend. Thank you, and have a great day. Bye-bye.